Hi everybody, this is Lindsay from WindingRoadCrochet.com, and today I'm going to show you how to embroider on crochet. If you like this tutorial, make sure to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and you can also catch me on Instagram and Facebook. Also, if you like this type of project, let me know in the comments below and I'll do more like this. So for this project, the very first step you're going to need to do is to crochet a base. Now I do have a pattern for this base, but basically it's just a circle that I have crocheted until it was about 1 inch less diameter than my embroidery hoop. The hoop I have here is a 6-inch hoop, so my piece is about a 5-inch diameter circle. After I have my base made, I just like to attach it to my hoop using a few strands of yarn. Here I have it in the pink. And that just holds my piece centered while I stitch it onto the hoop. When I fastened off my yarn, I left a really long tail in order to sew this to the embroidery hoop. So I just put a needle through that yarn, and then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to whip stitch to every other stitch on the last row of this circle. So you're just going to pull it through, pull it as tight as you can, skip a stitch, come through the next stitch, pull as tight as you can, and you really want to try to keep that tension going. It is possible to tighten it up a little bit later, but it's really important to try to keep it as tight as you can while you're sewing. And then just continue sewing all the way around the edge. When it's complete and you still are holding the tension on that yarn, you're just going to take your needle, run your needle under a stitch, kind of like you're weaving in your end, somewhere near where that last strand of yarn kind of looks even, because the nice thing about working every other stitch is it makes our stitches around the edge look nice and even. So you're just going to pull that through, twist your loop that you have, and run your yarn through that, and that will knot it together. And from there, you're just going to clip off, in my case, the pink pieces that are holding everything in place, and you are ready to start embroidering. So right now, I'm just going to show you a few different stitches to make your embroidery piece. We're going to learn this woven rose. We're going to learn these little leaves here, which are actually using something called the lazy daisy stitch. I also use that kind of what I call a double lazy daisy stitch for the buds. And then here we have the stem stitch in the middle. I'm not showing this little leaf here. It's a little more complex, and I wanted to keep this a pretty easy pattern. So that's what we'll be doing. Now to get started with the woven rose, I'm going to use 2 colors of yarn, but really you just want to use 1. What we're going to be doing is making kind of a 5-point skinny star to get started, and I am using about 10 feet of yarn here. I always like to go a little bit less than 2 arms width, and then when you get your yarn, what you want to do is to double up the yarn as much as possible. So I take this strand here and I'm just going to pull on it till it's about doubled up. And then right at the end of the work, you just want to have maybe a foot or so in between your 2 yarn ends. That way that's going to be the area you're working with, and everything else is just kind of saving you that length that you have to pull through. So to get started, one real good tip with embroidering on crochet is that we're going to start our work by weaving in our end. So I'm going to flip it over here. I'm just going to go under a few stitches kind of close to where I want my rose to be, my first rose. And I'm just going to go under a few stitches here. It's actually better to go back and forth a few times, but I'm just going to go under once to hold the end of my yarn in place. So once that's in place, I'm just going to flip it back over and find the center of my rose. Now I don't want to go through a hole like I just did. I want to go through the center of a stitch, because that's going to hold my stitches exactly where I want them. Those holes are pretty large, and the stitch will move around on you and won't be as precise as you'd like it to be. So I'm going to go ahead and decide how wide I want my rose. Each stitch is going to be about half the width of the rose. And here it's not really important to have a perfect star. but it's more important that you have your stitches roughly the same size. And the way I do that, so I've made my first stitch, I come up through the center for the second stitch, is I pull my yarn up and measure it, and then find my new spot, mark it with my thumb, and then use my needle to make that exact size stitch. And so I'm just going to do this till I have a full 5-point star. So here I've made a handful of stars, just kind of placing out where I want my roses. And now we're ready to go ahead and start making the rose part by weaving in and out of these strands of yarn. So now I've grabbed a new color of yarn, but you would continue with the yarn you already have. And again, I'm just going to weave in this end before I start, and then when you finish a strand you will also weave in the end as well. So we're just going to pull our yarn up really close to the center of our star, and then just like the name Woven Rose implies, we are going to weave this in and out of our 5 strands. So we're going over the first strand, we're going to go under the next strand, then over, and then under, and then over again. And then because we went over the first one and we have an odd number, we'll be going under it the second time. So just do maybe 3 strands at a time. Don't try to do a whole loop. And then just pull your yarn all the way through. Again, I'm using about 10 feet of yarn here, and I have it doubled up as much as possible because I don't want it to take a long time to have to pull it through. So back to that first loop, we're going under. And then every place you went over on the last round, that's where we will be going under. And at the beginning of your rows, it's okay to pull it pretty tight. Not super tight, but it's okay that it's tight. As we get to the outer petals, because each loop around is going to act like a layer of petals. After we get to like the outer petals, we do want these loops to be a little bit looser. It gives it more of a 3D look and makes it look a lot like petals. They also lay nicer on top of each other. So I'm just going to keep doing this all the way around, and I will show you what it looks like when we get it a little bit larger. So here my rose is a little bit larger, and you can kind of see that I'm just doing a lot looser loops so that it lays flat versus piling up on each other. And you just really want to keep going until you have none of that under part showing through. Again, if you're using the same color, it blends in a lot easier. So here I'm going to try and finish up. I'm just going to push my needle through on the opposite side of one of the strands so it hides it. I'm going to pull it all the way through, and there you go. Your rose is done. It creates a beautiful 3D rose. So I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of my roses, and then I'll show you how to embroider the leaves and the buds. And voila, my 4 roses are done, and it's time for me to go ahead and start in making my stem. I'm going to use green for this. I am going to go under at least 1 stitch to hold the stitches on the back end. And if you don't like the look of the back, you can just put a piece of felt over it. It's not a big deal. But we're going to take our yarn needle and we're going to come up kind of underneath one of our roses where we think the stem is going to start. You want to make sure you go under the pieces of yarn and not through them. So now we're going to do something called a stem stitch. And it's a very pretty stitch, kind of looks like it's twisting the yarn together. And it is very, very easy to do. All we're going to do is make about 1/4 of an inch stitch. Again, make sure you're working through the center of the stitches. You don't want to work into those holes, otherwise you're going to have gaps in between your stitches. And then you want to come up in the middle of the 2 spots where your yarn has gone through. So halfway in between before you pull everything tight. Now we can go ahead and pull that loop tight, and we're ready to do our next stitch. So from where the last stitch ended, we're only going about 1/4 of an inch out or so. And if you want to twist your needle around, you can, because we're going to come out right here where that other stitch was. but you just want to make sure you're coming up and over the yarn. You don't want to go through that loop because that's what's going to cause this to be twisted. So pull that and you can see how that yarn is starting to get twisted on each other. And then what I like to do here is I like to have a curved look. So I actually like to follow one of the rows of single crochet. So again, I'm going in, coming out where the middle of that stitch is, or right where the end of the last stitch was, pulling that through and getting that twisted effect. So I'm going to do that all the way around, and then we'll start doing our leaves and our rosebuds. And then I might add a few extra stitches just connecting the rest of the roses in place. So here I've finished out, I branched off in a few spots, I attached my roses to the other rows, and now I'm ready to do some leaves. Now with the leaves we're doing something called the lazy daisy stitch, normally done as a full flower, but this is just going to be a simple stitch. You're going to pull your yarn up through a hole close to your stem, and then you're actually going to take your needle and go right back down that hole. Be very careful not to pull all the yarn through. You want to have a loop left over. Particularly, you want to have a loop left over that is the size of the leaf that you want to have. So once that is there, we're going to take our yarn needle and we're going to come up right at the end of the leaf, on the point side of the leaf. We're going to go through our loop. And at this point, you can pull everything tight if you want, but if you pull it really tight, it's going to be a really narrow leaf. And then we're going to go right back down the hole that we came up again. And what it's going to do is it's going to tack the end of that leaf in place. Again, if you do it real tight, it's going to be a narrow leaf. If you do it really loose, it's going to be a much wider leaf. But it's a really easy way to get that nice oval shape. So I'm going to do a few more all around these roses here. And then I'll come back and show you how to do this exact same thing, just slightly different for our rosebuds. So here's just doing one more leaf off to the side, kind of tucked under some of those roses. And then again, you just make that little tack right at the end. So there you have it. All of our leaves are done. And you can see that this last leaf, it's a little bit thicker, and that's exactly what we're going to be doing for our rosebuds. I like to call it a double lazy daisy, and I'll show you how to do it right now. So I'm going to be using pink. I went ahead and got rid of my green. I'm going to come up through one spot right at the end of this stitch. Going to go right back down into that same hole. Again, don't pull all the way through. You want to leave a loop. Once the loop is the length that you want, find out where you need to pull up your next stitch. Pull up and put your loop over your needle. You could pull the needle all the way through and then go through the loop. That's fine. Pull this all the way through, and for the first one, I want you to pull it a little bit tighter. Make this a narrow lazy daisy stitch. And then I'm going to make a tacked stitch, but I'm going to make that tack stitch a little bit longer. You can see how you can see that at the end? That's what we want. This is completely okay. We're going to come back up through where we started our lazy daisy stitch, and we're going to put our needle down through the stitch, that tack stitch we made up at the top. And then leave that a little on the loose side because we want it to make our rosebud larger, and then go right back down through that center spot. And there you go. That's how you have a little rosebud. That's the lazy daisy double stitch is what I've been calling it, because we're working through it twice. You can actually work through it as many times as you want, but working through it twice gives us a perfect little rosebud. So I'm going to pull my loop out a little bit and really quickly make a second rosebud. So once again, you're going to make that tack stitch at the end, pull it all through, make it a kind of more narrow, tighter loop, come back up through that bottom section, go through that tack stitch that you made, and then back down through. And that's all it takes. There's your rosebuds. So now I'm going to go ahead and make a few little stitches right around the edge here, and we'll be all done. So I really hope you enjoyed this video tutorial, and if you like this type of project, let me know and I will make more like it. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you're notified of other videos. Until next time, happy crocheting!